professors. I say to my students always, read the original documents. Do not take my word for anything, because it is my opinion, and it's based on my experiences. Read the original documents. Now, perhaps one of the best things, and we get to read, by the way, over there. We get to read, we get to watch television. Time doesn't matter, so we can wait for 50 years to find out whether a book is worth reading or a TV program is worth watching. I love The Wizard of Oz. But keep in mind what the wizard gave to the scarecrow, who didn't have a brain. What did he give it? Who can tell me? What did he give it? Right, he gave him a diploma. And the diploma stands for, allegedly, having knowledge. There are an awful lot of educated fools in the United States today, and I think the supply is going up. One of the best things I did in my life was to introduce Thomas Paine to what would become the United States of America. And he was the first man to write the phrase, the United States of America. He understood what this country should be, and he had been here only 2 years when he did that. Here's a quote from his Rights of Man. The Constitution is the property of a nation, not of those who exercise the government. All of the constitutions of America, and that refers to the states and the colonies prior, are declared to be established on the authority of the people. In France, the word nation is used instead of the people. But in both cases, the Constitution is a thing antecedent to the government and always distinct therefrom. I'll wager that almost everybody in this room understands that concept, but there are an awful lot of people, including some in positions of power, including some who wear the robes of the Supreme Court, who do not understand it. George Washington, in his farewell address, a very interesting man, said, the Constitution, until amended by the authentic act of the whole people, is sacredly obligatory upon all. We use more flowery language then than you do now. But the meaning of that was, until the Constitution was amended in accord with its own clause, which is Article 5, which means 2/3 of Congress to propose an amendment and 3/4 of the states to ratify. Until that had been done, what existed prior was sacredly obligatory upon all. Now this tells you the problem with the phrase a living constitution. First of all, why did the Articles of Confederation fail? The national government had no effective way to gain revenue. Our ambassadors at the end were beggars with better clothes on in the courts of Europe, borrowing money at 20% to send it home for the current expenses of the federal government. And anybody who's ever sat at a kitchen table trying to figure out next month's budget knows that that is the way to perdition. To be borrowing money for current expenses, and we were doing that. 2 times amendments were proposed which would have solved, or possibly solved, that problem. And both times they were rejected because the Articles of Confederation, those of you who read this know Article 23, says that amendments have to be unanimously accepted by the states. And 2 times, amendments to save that government were proposed and ratified by 12 of the 13 states. But of course, that meant they failed both times. And now, in the meantime, because the federal government couldn't pay its debts, including its debts to the soldiers who had served in the Glorious Revolution, including a gentleman called Daniel Shays in Massachusetts. How many of you have heard the name of Daniel Shays? Because he hadn't been paid his wages as an officer in George Washington's army, he lost his farm because he couldn't pay a debt, a property tax debt to the state, or excuse me, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts of $12. And that made him quite angry, and he got in touch with other soldiers who had served in the Revolution. And they went to attack the government of Massachusetts. And Shays' rebellion could have spread because there were many other states that were filled with veterans who had not been paid. So it was the failure of the Articles and also the threat of insurrection, because the word of Shays' Rebellion had spread. That caused the urgency when we met in Philadelphia. Two things are important about a constitution. One is the restrictions it places on the government. The second is the checks and balances. Because we knew from Montesquieu's Spirit of the Laws and other documents we read extensively in Philadelphia, that if you fragment power and you give different parts of it to different groups, the idea that all those different groups will be collectively, or individually rather, overrun by usurpers and then cooperate with each other to destroy the structure that put them in place, namely the Constitution, is very low. And then, of course, there's the second barrier of the difference between the states and the federal government. Both are under attack in the United States today. I could go through the Constitution chapter and verse because I've read it a few thousand times. The interesting thing is it can be read and understood by people who have an actual high school education, which certainly isn't true of any of the laws being passed by Congress today. A 2,000-page law? Think about this. In 1804, the First Homestead Law was passed, and the idea was that there were people who were going bankrupt and unable to feed their families and clustered in the slums of the eastern cities of the United States. On the other hand, there was millions of acres in the West where the government would prefer that these people go to live. And the First Homestead Law, passed under Jefferson's administration in 1804, took 2.5 pages. And it said if you were 19 or you were head of household, that gives you an idea how life was not easy then. There were people who were head of household who were not yet 19. You could go west and claim 160 acres, and I think the price was $1.25 an acre. And that $1.25 paid for the survey to establish that that was your land. And you live on it, you work on it for 5 years, and it's yours. Very simple, very short law. But when you write a law that's in accord with human nature, it works. More people migrated to the West and set up farms and so forth in a shorter period of time than any other peaceful migration in the history of the human race. And the law was 2.5 pages. The present Congress couldn't declare a national pickle week in 2.5 pages. But that's the point. If you make the law, and the Constitution should be the same way, it should be in accord with the tendencies of the people to function well and also to control the evil that men do. Because both of them are part of us and always have been and always will be. I don't regret growing old. I do regret growing old and fat. I have to say something from